My 4-year-old niece showed up at my door at midnight. What's wrong? How did you get here? She cried. Mommy said we don't need you anymore, because there's a baby coming. Then I saw the paper in her hand. Parental rights relinquishment form. I called my brother, and the truth left me speechless. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. The knock came at midnight, soft and hesitant against the steel door of Cass Mercer's workshop. He looked up from the twisted metal sculpture he'd been welding, his mask pushed back, sweat cooling on his forehead. The October wind whistled through the gaps in his converted barn, carrying the scent of pine and rain-soaked earth. Nobody knocked at midnight. Not in Asheville, Oregon, where folks minded their own business and kept their troubles locked behind closed doors. Cass set down his torch and pulled off his work gloves. His boots crunched across the concrete floor, past half-finished sculptures that looked like the broken bones of some ancient beast. He'd been working late again, same as every night since Brennan's funeral 3 months ago. Sleep brought dreams, and dreams brought questions he couldn't answer. The knock came again. Weaker this time, he flicked on the porch light and opened the door that a little girl stood on his doorstep, barefoot and shivering. Her dark hair hung in tangled strings around her face, and her pajamas pink with cartoon unicorns were damp from the mist. She clutched a crumpled piece of paper in her small fist. Hollis! Cass dropped to one knee, his voice barely above a whisper. His niece looked up at him with eyes the same shade of green as Brennan's had been. Tears streaked down her cheeks, and her whole body trembled. Uncle Cass, she said, her voice breaking. Mommy said I can't stay anymore 'cause she's having a new baby, and you're the last one left. Something cold and sharp twisted in Cass's chest. He reached out, and Hollis collapsed into his arms, her small body racked with sobs. She smelled like unwashed hair and fear. She said, I don't belong. Hollis whispered against his shoulder. She gave me this paper and told me to bring it to you. She said you'd know what to do. Cass took the crumpled document from her hand. Even in the dim porch light, he could see official-looking letterhead and legal language. His jaw tightened as he read the words parental rights relinquishment form at the top. Come inside, sweetheart, he said, lifting Hollis in his arms. You're safe now. He carried her through the workshop and up the narrow stairs to his living space above. The apartment was sparse: a couch, a kitchen table, a bookshelf filled with military manuals and metalworking guides. But it was warm, and it was clean, and it was nothing like the chaos Hollis had been living in. Cass set her down on the couch and wrapped her in the wool blanket his grandmother had made. Hollis pulled it tight around her shoulders, still shaking. Are you hungry? He asked. She nodded. He heated up leftover soup while she sat silent on the couch, staring at her bare feet. When he brought her the bowl, she ate like someone who hadn't seen food in days. The observation made his hands clench into fists. Hollis, he said, settling into the chair across from her. Tell me what happened tonight. She looked up from her soup, her green eyes wide and frightened. Mommy was crying a lot. She kept saying she couldn't do it anymore, that the new baby needed everything, and there wasn't room for me. What about Kirk? Was he there? Hollis nodded. He was mean. He said I was too much trouble and that Daddy would have wanted me gone anyway. The words hit Cass like a physical blow. Brennan had lived for this little girl. She'd been the center of his world, the reason he'd worked double shifts at the lumber mill and saved every penny for her college fund. Mommy made me pack my backpack, Hollis continued. But then she said I couldn't take it 'cause there was no room where I was going. She gave me that paper and walked me to the road. She said someone would pick me up, but nobody came. So I walked here. Cass's blood turned to ice. You walked. In the dark, I remembered the way from when Daddy brought me before. It took a long time. 3 miles. A 4-year-old had walked 3 miles in the dark, alone, because her mother had abandoned her on the side of the road. Cass stood and walked to the window, his hands shaking with rage he couldn't let Hollis see. Uncle Cass. Her voice was small and scared. Did I do something wrong? He turned back to her, forcing his expression to soften. No, sweetheart. You didn't do anything wrong. Not one thing. Then why doesn't Mommy want me? The question cut deeper than any blade. Cass sat back down and took her small hands in his larger ones. They were so cold, so fragile. Sometimes grown-ups make terrible choices, he said, but that's not your fault. It's never your fault. Hollis nodded, though he could see she didn't really understand. How could she? She was 4 years old, and the two people who were supposed to love her most had failed her completely. Can I stay here? She asked. I'll be good. I won't make any noise. You can stay, Cass said, for as long as you want. He helped her brush her teeth with a spare toothbrush and found her one of his old army t-shirts to sleep in. She curled up in his bed while he took the couch, but she was asleep before he'd even turned out the lights. Cass sat in the darkness and spread the relinquishment form on the coffee table. He turned on a small lamp and studied the document carefully. That IT was printed on legal letterhead from a template anyone could download online. The language was formal and binding if it were real. But Cass had seen Brennan's signature 1,000 times on birthday cards and Christmas gifts. This wasn't it. The handwriting was too careful, too deliberate. Brennan had terrible handwriting, all sharp angles and rushed letters from years of filling out work orders at the mill. This signature was practiced, like someone had traced it multiple times before committing it to paper. The witness section was completely blank. According to Oregon law, a document like this required 2 witnesses and notarization. This had neither. Cass's military training had taught him to observe details others missed, to think 3 steps ahead of the enemy. Right now, Laurel had made herself his enemy, and she just handed him evidence of her crime. He pulled out his phone and took photos of the document from multiple angles, making sure to capture the fraudulent signature and missing witness signatures. Then he walked to his desk and pulled out a manila folder. For 3 months, he'd been collecting pieces of a puzzle that hadn't made sense. Brennan's supposed suicide, the timing of Laurel's new relationship with Kirk, the way she'd immediately moved Kirk into Brennan's house while Hollis was still sleeping in her father's bed. Now he had another piece, and the picture was starting to come together. Cass opened his laptop and began typing a detailed account of the night's events, including timestamps and direct quotes from Hollis. His fingers moved with military precision across the keyboard, documenting everything while it was fresh in his memory. This wasn't just child abandonment. This was a crime, and Cass was going to make sure Laurel paid for every single thing she'd done. Cass woke at dawn to the sound of Hollis crying. He found her sitting up in bed, clutching the army t-shirt and looking around the unfamiliar room with panic in her eyes. "It's okay," he said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "You're safe. You're with me." She crawled into his lap, and he held her until the crying stopped. Her small body felt so fragile against his chest, like something that could break if he wasn't careful. "I want my daddy," she whispered. "I know, sweetheart. I miss him too." They had breakfast together, eggs and toast that Hollis picked at while Cass studied the relinquishment form again in the morning light. The more he examined it, the more obvious the fraud became. After Hollis finished eating, he helped her wash her face and hands. Her pajamas were dirty and torn in places, and he could see faint bruises on her arms that looked like fingerprints. "Hollis," he said carefully, "did someone hurt you? Did someone grab you?" She nodded. "Kirk gets mad sometimes. He says I'm too loud." Cass's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice gentle. "How many times did Kirk get mad?" "Lots of times. Mommy says I need to be quieter so Kirk doesn't get upset." Each word was another nail in Laurel's coffin. Cass pulled out his phone and took careful photos of the bruises, making sure to capture them clearly without frightening Hollis further. "We need to go see a doctor," he said, "just to make sure you're okay. I don't want to go back to Mommy." "You're not going back to her. I promise." Cass called the Asheville Community Hospital and explained that he needed to bring his niece in for an emergency examination. He didn't mention the abandonment yet. That would come later, when he had all his facts straight. While they waited for the appointment, he called his friend Jake, who worked security at the mill. "I need a favor," Cass said when Jake answered. "Can you access the security footage from my property? The camera's at the front gate." "What's going on, man?" "Someone's going to claim I kidnapped my niece. I need proof of what really happened." There was a pause. "Jesus, Cass, are you serious?" "Dead serious." "Can you do it?" "Yeah, I can pull the footage and save it to a drive." "When do you need it?" "Yesterday." After Jake agreed to help, Cass made another call to Naira Kenley, a family attorney who'd handled his grandmother's estate. He'd heard she was tough, that she didn't back down from fights, especially when children were involved. "Mr. Mercer," Naira said when her secretary put him through. "I was sorry to hear about your brother." "Thank you. I'm calling because I need help. Legal help. What kind of trouble are you in?" Cass looked at Hollis, who was coloring in an old sketchbook he'd given her. The kind where a 4-year-old gets abandoned on the side of the road with forged legal documents. There was a long silence. "Are you talking about your niece?" "Yes. Laurel dumped her at my door last night with a fake relinquishment form. She's got bruises on her arms and hasn't been fed properly in days. And I'm guessing that by now, Laurel has reported her missing and claimed I took her. Where are you right now?" "My house. We're heading to the hospital in an hour." "Don't talk to anyone without me present," Naira said. "Not the police, not CPS, not anyone. I'll meet you at the hospital." "Why would CPS?" "Because abandoning a child is a felony, and desperate people do desperate things to cover their tracks. Laurel's going to try to flip this on you." Cass felt the familiar calm that had kept him alive during 3 tours in Afghanistan. When the situation got complicated, when the stakes were life and death, his mind went cold and clear. "Let her try," he said. To the hospital, Dr. Rivera examined Hollis with gentle hands and a kind voice. She was patient with the little girl's shyness, talking to her about the cartoon characters on her pajamas while she checked for injuries. The results were worse than Cass had expected. Hollis was dehydrated and underweight for her age. The bruises on her arms were consistent with being grabbed roughly by adult hands. There were older injuries, too. Healed cuts on her knees and a scar on her forehead that looked like it came from being struck by something hard. "How long has she been in your care?" Dr. Rivera asked. "Since midnight last night." The doctor's expression darkened. "Mr. Mercer, I'm required by law to report suspected child abuse. Based on what I'm seeing here, this child has been neglected for some time." "I understand, and I want you to report it." Dr. Rivera studied his face. "Most people in your situation would be worried about the investigation. I'm not most people, and this little girl deserves someone who will fight for her." Naira arrived as Dr. Rivera was finishing her examination. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and prematurely gray hair, wearing a black suit that looked like armor. "Mr. Mercer," she said, shaking his hand. "I've already heard from the sheriff's department. Laurel Mercer reported her daughter kidnapped at 6 this morning." Cass's expression didn't change. "Good. Let them come. You seem awfully calm for someone who's about to be arrested. I've got security footage of Hollis walking up to my door alone. I've got photos of the forged documents. And now I've got medical records documenting the abuse and neglect." He gestured toward Hollis, who was getting a lollipop from Dr. Rivera. "The evidence speaks for itself." Naira smiled grimly. "I think we're going to work well together." Sheriff Deputy Martinez arrived at the hospital 30 minutes later, his expression serious but not hostile. Cass recognized him from high school. They'd played football together before Cass joined the Army. "Sorry about this, Cass," Martinez said. "But I got to ask, did you take Hollis from her mother's house last night?" "No," Cass said simply. "She came to me. Laurel says you broke in and took her while she was sleeping." Naira stepped forward. "Deputy Martinez, my client has evidence that directly contradicts Mrs. Mercer's claims. We have security footage, medical records, and documentary evidence of child abandonment and forgery." Martinez's eyebrows rose. "Forgery?" Cass handed him the relinquishment form. "This is supposed to be my brother's signature." "It's not." Martinez studied the document. "I need a handwriting expert to verify that." "Then get one," Naira said. "In the meantime, we'll be filing for emergency temporary custody based on documented abuse and abandonment." "What about Mrs. Mercer's claim that Hollis was kidnapped?" "Deputy," Naira said, her voice patient but firm, "kidnappers don't typically take their victims to the hospital for medical care and call attorneys to document evidence of abuse. They also don't have security footage showing the child arriving alone and on foot." Martinez looked between them, then at Hollis, who was sitting quietly in the corner with her lollipop. The little girl's thin frame and fading bruises told their own story. "I'll need to take statements from both of you," he said finally. "And I'll need to see that security footage." "Jake's bringing it now." Cass said, along with the timestamp data. 20 minutes later, Jake arrived with a laptop and a flash drive. The security footage was crystal clear. Hollis walking up the dirt road alone, her small figure illuminated by the motion sensor lights as she approached Cass's workshop. The timestamp showed 11:47 p.m. Martinez watched the footage twice, his expression growing darker each time. Jesus, he muttered. She's just a baby. A baby who was abandoned on the side of the road in the middle of the night, Naira said, by a mother who then filed a false police report to cover her crime. Martinez closed the laptop. I need to talk to Laurel again. This changes things. Deputy, Cass said, what happens now? Now I arrest her for filing a false report. Then CPS gets involved, and you'll need to go through the courts for custody. Martinez looked at Hollis again. But between you and me, any judge who sees this evidence is going to rule in your favor. After Martinez left, Naira helped Cass file the emergency custody petition. They attached Dr. Rivera's medical report, photos of the forged document, and a copy of the security footage. How long until we get a hearing? Cass asked. Emergency custody cases move fast when there's evidence of abuse. Could be as soon as tomorrow. What about Laurel? Will she fight it? Naira's smile was sharp as a blade. Oh, she'll fight, but she's going to lose. And when she does, we're going to make sure she faces criminal charges for every law she's broken. That evening, Cass took Hollis shopping for clothes and toys. She was overwhelmed by the department store, clinging to his hand and speaking in whispers. When he told her she could pick out anything she wanted, she chose a small stuffed elephant and 2 sets of pajamas. That's all? He asked. She nodded solemnly. Mommy said wanting things makes you greedy. Cass knelt down to her level. Hollis, you're not greedy for wanting things. You're a little girl, and little girls deserve toys and pretty clothes and anything else that makes them happy. Really, really. Now, pick out some more things. We've got room in the cart. By the time they left the store, Hollis had a new wardrobe, a collection of books, and a smile that made Cass's chest tight with something he couldn't name. That night, as he tucked her in a bed, she looked up at him with those green eyes that reminded him so much of Brennan. Uncle Cass, she said, are you going to keep me? Forever and always, he said. That's a promise. As Hollis drifted off to sleep, Cass sat in his living room and opened the manila folder he'd been filling for 3 months. Brennan's autopsy report was on top, followed by photos from the scene and witness statements. Tomorrow, the legal battle would begin. But tonight, he had a new piece of the puzzle evidence that Laurel was capable of abandoning her own child. If she could do that, what else was she capable of? Cass pulled out his laptop and began typing a new document, this one outlining every inconsistency he'd found in Brennan's death. The suicide ruling had never sat right with him, and now he had reason to dig deeper. He was going to find the truth about what happened to his brother. And when he did, Laurel was going to pay for everything she destroyed. The emergency custody hearing took place in Judge Patricia Reeves' courtroom at 9 a.m. sharp. Cass wore his only suit, the same black one he'd worn to Brennan's funeral, while Hollis sat beside him in a new blue dress, holding her stuffed elephant tight against her chest. Laurel entered with her attorney, expensive-looking man in a gray suit who kept checking his phone. She dressed for sympathy pale makeup, simple black dress, her blonde hair pulled back in what was supposed to look like grief, but came across as calculation. When she saw Hollis, Laurel's face crumpled into practiced tears. My baby, she whispered loudly enough for the judge to hear. What has he done to you? Hollis shrank closer to Cass, and he put a protective arm around her shoulders. Mr. Kellerman, Judge Reeves said to Laurel's attorney, your client has made serious allegations. I trust you have evidence to support them. Your Honor, my client is a grieving widow who made a momentary error in judgment due to pregnancy hormones and overwhelming stress. She never intended to abandon her daughter, merely to seek temporary help from a family member. Naira stood, her voice cutting through the courtroom like a blade. Your Honor, the evidence will show that Mrs. Mercer deliberately abandoned her 4-year-old daughter on the side of Country Road at midnight, in violation of Oregon Revised Statute 163.545. She then compounded this felony by filing a false police report claiming the child had been kidnapped. Judge Reeves studied the file in front of her. Ms. Kinley, I've reviewed your emergency petition. The allegations are severe. Present your evidence. Naira approached the bench with a thick folder. Your Honor, Exhibit A is the security footage showing Hollis Mercer arriving alone at my client's residence at 11:47 p.m. Exhibit B is the forged parental relinquishment form containing a fraudulent signature. Exhibit C is Dr. Rivera's medical report documenting evidence of physical abuse and neglect. She placed photos on the judge's desk showing Hollis's bruises, her underweight frame, the clear signs of long-term neglect. Judge Reeves' expression grew darker as she examined each image. Mrs. Mercer, the judge said, looking directly at Laurel, how do you explain these injuries to your daughter? Laurel's attorney whispered in her ear, but she shook her head and stood. Your Honor, children get bruises. Hollis is clumsy, and she bruises easily. I would never hurt her. And the security footage showing her walking alone to her uncle's house. I was having a difficult night. I asked Cass to come get her, and he misunderstood. Mrs. Mercer, Judge Reeves said, her voice ice cold. You're claiming you asked the defendant to collect your daughter, but the footage shows a 4-year-old child walking 3 miles alone in the dark. Are you suggesting your brother-in-law deliberately left a toddler to walk country roads at midnight? Laurel's face flushed red. That's not what I meant. Naira approached the witness box where Laurel sat. Mrs. Mercer, did you or did you not drive your daughter to the end of Timber Creek Road and leave her there? I object, Kellerman said, leading the witness. Overruled, Judge Reeves said. Answer the question, Mrs. Mercer. Laurel's hands shook as she gripped the microphone. I was overwhelmed. I'm pregnant, and I couldn't think clearly. I just needed help. So you abandoned a 4-year-old on a country road at midnight. It wasn't abandonment. I knew Cass would take care of her. The courtroom fell silent. Laurel had just admitted to exactly what she'd been denying for 20 minutes. Judge Reeves set down her papers and looked directly at Laurel. Mrs. Mercer, in my 20 years on this bench, I have never seen such a clear case of child endangerment combined with deliberate deception. Your own testimony confirms that you knowingly left a 4-year-old child to find her way to safety alone in the dark on dangerous rural roads. She turned to Cass. Mr. Mercer, you're requesting full temporary custody? Yes, Your Honor. Granted. Mrs. Mercer, you will have supervised visitation only, pending a full investigation by Child Protective Services. This court also orders that you undergo psychological evaluation and parenting classes before any consideration of increased visitation. Laurel's scream of rage echoed through the courtroom. You can't do this. She's my daughter. Cass is manipulating everyone. Mrs. Mercer, Judge Reeves said firmly, your behavior in this courtroom only reinforces my decision. Bailiff, please escort Mrs. Mercer out. As Laurel was led away, still screaming threats and accusations, Hollis pressed closer to Cass. He could feel her small body trembling. Is she going to take me back? Hollis whispered. No, sweetheart, Cass said, his voice steady despite the rage burning in his chest. You're staying with me. After the hearing, Naira walked with them to the parking lot. That was easier than I expected, she said. Laurel's lawyer clearly didn't prepare her for direct examination. What happens next? Cass asked. CPS will do their investigation, but it's mostly a formality. The real question is whether the district attorney's office will file criminal charges. They will, Cass said with certainty. You sound confident, because I'm not done gathering evidence. He looked down at Hollis, who was playing with her elephant in the back seat of his truck. Naira, I need to ask you something. If someone wanted to look into my brother's death, how would they go about it? Naira stopped walking. Cass, Brennan's death was ruled as suicide. The case is closed. What if the ruling was wrong? You'd need new evidence. Significant new evidence that would justify reopening the investigation. Cass thought about the autopsy report he'd obtained, about the inconsistencies he'd noted, about Laurel's reaction when Brennan had talked about seeking full custody of Hollis. What kind of evidence? The kind that proves that someone had motive, means, and opportunity to commit murder. Why? What do you know? I know Brennan never drank alcohol. I know he was planning to file for divorce and full custody. And I know that Laurel had everything to lose if he followed through. Naira studied his face. Cass, be very careful here. Accusing someone of murder without solid proof can destroy your custody case. Then I'll make sure I have solid proof. That afternoon, while Hollis napped, Cass called Tully Raines, Brennan's best friend and co-worker at the lumber mill. They met at the Copper Kettle, a diner on the outskirts of town, where the coffee was strong and the conversations were private. Tully looked like he'd aged 10 years in the 3 months since Brennan's death. His usual smile was gone, replaced by dark circles under his eyes and a nervous habit of checking over his shoulder. I've been waiting for someone to ask me about Bren, Tully said when Cass sat across from him. Nobody wanted to hear what I had to say after the cops ruled it suicide. I'm listening now. Tully leaned forward, lowering his voice. Bren wasn't suicidal, Cass. I worked next to him every day for 8 years. I would have known. The coroner found prescription drugs in his system. Benzodiazepines, right? Thing is, Bren never took anything stronger than aspirin. He was paranoid about prescription drugs ever since her dad's addiction problems. Cass felt something cold settle in his stomach. What else? 2 weeks before he died, Bren came to me upset. Said Laurel had been acting strange, that his drinks tasted bitter sometimes. He thought she might be slipping him something to make him sleep, so she could sneak out at night. Sneak out to see Kirk. That's what Bren suspected. He hired a private investigator to follow her. Guy got photos of Laurel and Kirk together, but Bren died before he could use them in divorce proceedings. Cass's hands clenched into fists. Do you know this investigator's name? Yeah, Rex Winters. He's got an office downtown. Tully's voice dropped even lower. Cass, there's something else. The night Bren died, Laurel called me. Said she'd found him in the bathtub and that I needed to come help her. But when I got there, she'd already called 911 and she was perfectly calm. Like, unnaturally calm for someone who just found their husband dead. What did you tell the police? Everything. But they'd already made up their minds. Depressed man, recent job stress, history of family addiction problems. They didn't want to hear about suspicious wives and bitter drinks. Cass pulled out his phone and showed Tully the photos of Hollis's bruises. She did this to his daughter. Then she abandoned her on the side of the road. Tully's face went white. Jesus Christ, Cass. You have to stop her. I'm going to. But I need your help. Anything. I need you to make a statement about everything Brennan told you. About the bitter drinks, about Laurel's behavior, about the private investigator. And I need you to be willing to testify in court. Tully nodded without hesitation. If it means getting justice for Bren and protecting that little girl, I'll testify against the devil himself. After leaving the diner, Cass drove to Rex Winter's office. The private investigator was a thick-set man in his 50s with sharp eyes and the careful demeanor of someone who'd seen too much of humanity's dark side. Brennan Mercer, Winters said when Cass introduced himself. I wondered when someone from his family would come around. That case never sat right with me. What did you find? Winters pulled out a thick file. Photos of Laurel and Kirk Blaine together, dating back 6 months before your brother's death. Hotel receipts, restaurant bills, text messages I managed to recover from her phone records. He spread the photos across his desk. Laurel and Kirk kissing in a restaurant parking lot, entering a motel together. Kirk's truck parked in the driveway of Brennan's house while Brennan was at work. How long were they together before Brennan died? At least 8 months. Maybe longer. Kirk a piece of work too. He's got a record for domestic violence and fraud. Lost his contractor's license for billing homeowners for work he never completed. Cass studied the photos, his rage building with each image. Did Brennan see these? I just delivered them the week before he died. He was planning to file for divorce and sue for full custody of his daughter. Said he had evidence that Laurel was using drugs around the kid. What kind of evidence? Photos of pills hidden around the house. Recordings of her making deals with local dealers. Your brother was building an airtight case. Where is that evidence now? Winter's expression darkened. That's the thing. After Brennan died, Laurel cleaned out his office at home. Burned everything in the backyard, according to the neighbors. Said she was destroying painful memories. She destroyed evidence. That's what I think. But I couldn't prove it, and the cops weren't interested. Cass leaned back in his chair, pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. Rex, if someone wanted to reopen Brennan's case, what would they need? New evidence that contradicts the suicide ruling. Something that proves he didn't take those drugs voluntarily. Like testimony about bitter-tasting drinks. That would be a start, but you'd need more. Forensic evidence, witness testimony, proof of motive and opportunity. Cass stood and shook Winter's hand. How much would it cost to hire you to investigate Laurel Mercer and Kirk Blaine? For Brennan? No charge. I owe him that much. Then start digging. I want to know everything about both of them. Their finances, their communications, their movements in the weeks before Brennan died. What are you planning, Cass? I'm planning to give my brother justice. And I'm planning to make sure Laurel never hurts another child. That evening, Cass helped Hollis with a puzzle while he planned his next moves. The little girl was starting to smile more, to speak without fear in her voice. But she still flinched when doors slammed, still asked permission before eating or drinking anything. Uncle Cass, she said, fitting two puzzle pieces together. Are you going to find out what happened to Daddy? The question caught him off guard. What do you mean, sweetheart? Daddy didn't kill himself. He told me he would never leave me alone. Cass set down his puzzle piece and looked at her. How do you know Daddy didn't kill himself? Because he promised. And Daddy never broke his promises. Hollis looked up at him with those serious green eyes. Mommy did something bad to him, didn't she? The simple truth from a 4-year-old hit harder than any evidence Cass had collected. Yeah, sweetheart. I think she did. Are you going to stop her? Yes, Cass said, his voice steady and certain. I'm going to stop her. 3 weeks after the custody hearing, Cass had assembled a case that would have made his military commanders proud. Rex Winters had provided financial records showing large cash deposits in Laurel's account that coincided with Kirk's construction jobs. Phone records revealed hundreds of calls and texts between them, dating back almost a year. Most damning of all, Winters had recovered deleted text messages from a cloud backup Laurel had forgotten about. The messages painted a picture of two people planning a future together, a future that required Brennan to be out of the picture. Naira studied the evidence in her office while Cass sat across from her, Hollis coloring quietly in the corner. The little girl had started calling him Dad the week before, and each time she said it, Cass felt something fierce and protective settle deeper in his chest. This is substantial, Naira said, flipping through the text messages. But it's still circumstantial. You need something that directly implicates Laurel in Brennan's death. I have an idea about that, Cass said. But it involves risk. What kind of risk? The kind where I meet with Laurel and try to get her to confess. Naira set down the papers. Cass, that's extremely dangerous. If she's capable of murder, she's capable of anything. Not if I'm wearing a wire. The police would have to approve that, and they'd want to control the operation. Then let's talk to them. Detective Sarah Walsh had been the lead investigator on Brennan's case. She was a 30-year veteran of the Asheville Police Department with a reputation for thoroughness and a willingness to admit when she'd made mistakes. She listened to Cass's presentation without interruption, studying the evidence he'd compiled with the careful attention of someone who'd learned not to dismiss possibilities too quickly. Mr. Mercer, she said when he finished, I'll be honest with you. We closed your brother's case based on the evidence we had at the time. But this, she gestured to the files spread across her desk. This changes things. Enough to reopen the investigation. Enough to justify taking a closer look. The text messages alone are grounds for reopening, but you're right about needing direct evidence. Will you help us set up a meeting with Laurel? Walsh leaned back in her chair. It's risky. If she suspects you're recording, she could become violent. And even if she confesses, a good defense attorney could argue she was coerced. Detective, Naira said, my client is willing to take that risk, and we'll make sure everything is done by the book. Walsh nodded slowly. All right, but we do this my way. Controlled environment, backup nearby, and you follow my instructions exactly. They spent the next hour planning the operation. Cass would call Laurel and request a meeting, claiming he wanted to discuss shared custody arrangements now that the initial court proceedings were complete. He would suggest meeting at Riverside Park, a public location with good sight lines and multiple escape routes. What's your approach going to be? Walsh asked. I'm going to appeal to her self-interest, Cass said. Make her think I'm willing to compromise if she gives me the truth about what happened to Brennan. You think she'll buy that? Laurel's narcissistic. She believes everyone can be manipulated if you find the right leverage. She'll think she can convince me to see things her way. That afternoon, Cass made the call while Walsh monitored from her car in his driveway. Hollis was at daycare, safely away from whatever was about to unfold. "Laurel," he said when she answered. "We need to talk." "I have nothing to say to you," she snapped. "You stole my daughter. I saved your daughter. But that's not why I'm calling." There was a pause. "What do you want?" "I want the truth about Brennan. And I think you want something from me." "I don't want anything from you. You want Hollis back. And maybe there's a way we can both get what we want." The silence stretched longer this time. Cass could practically hear the gears turning in Laurel's head. "What are you suggesting?" "Meet me at Riverside Park tomorrow at 2. Come alone and bring an open mind." "Why should I trust you?" "Because I'm the only family Hollis has left besides you. And despite everything, I don't want her to grow up thinking her mother was a monster." The hook was set. Laurel agreed to meet, her voice already calculating the angles, already planning how to manipulate the situation to her advantage. The next day, Cass arrived at the park early. The October air was crisp, and the leaves on the oak trees had turned brilliant shades of red and gold. It would have been beautiful if not for the wire taped to his chest and the knowledge that he was about to confront his brother's killer. Walsh and 2 other detectives were positioned around the park, close enough to intervene if things went wrong, but far enough away to avoid detection. Naira waited in the car at the parking lot entrance with legal documents ready to file the moment they had what they needed. Laurel arrived exactly on time, driving Kirk's black pickup truck. She dressed carefully jeans and a sweater that emphasized her growing pregnancy. Minimal makeup to suggest vulnerability. Every detail was calculated for maximum sympathy. She approached the picnic table where Cass sat, her movements cautious but confident. "You wanted to talk," she said, settling across from him. "So talk. How far along are you?" Cass asked, nodding toward her stomach. 5 months. She placed a protective hand over her belly. Kirk's baby deserved a father who's present, not like Brennan was. Brennan was a good father. Brennan was weak. He couldn't handle the pressure of providing for a family. Cass kept his expression neutral, though every word was like acid in his veins. "Is that why he killed himself?" Laurel's eyes flickered with something that might have been guilt or might have been satisfaction. Brennan couldn't face the truth about what he was. A failure as a husband, a failure as a provider. When he found out about Kirk, he just gave up. "You mean when he found out you'd been cheating on him for almost a year?" "I wasn't cheating. I was surviving." Brennan was absent emotionally and physically. "Kirk gave me what I needed." "What about Hollis? What did she need?" "She needed stability. A real father figure. Not someone who worked all the time and came home exhausted." Cass leaned forward slightly. "Laurel, I know about the private investigator. I know Brennan had evidence of your affair. Evidence he was planning to use in divorce proceedings." Her face went pale, but she recovered quickly. "So what?" "Finding out about Kirk only proved what I've been trying to tell him for months, that our marriage was over. He was going to take Hollis away from you. He was going to try. But family courts favor mothers, especially when the father has a history of depression and addiction. Brennan didn't have a history of either. His father did. And mental illness runs in families." Cass felt the familiar cold calm settle over him. This was at the moment when everything would be decided. "Laurel," he said quietly, "I found Brennan's real suicide note." Her composure cracked slightly. "What?" "Hidden in his workshop. Detailed account of what you'd been doing to him. The bitter drinks, the sleeping pills you'd been crushing into his food. He knew you were trying to make him dependent on drugs, so you could claim he was unfit. It was a lie, but Laurel didn't know that." Her face went white, and her hands began to shake. "That's impossible," she whispered. "He wrote about how you'd been slowly poisoning him for weeks, how you planned to increase the dosage until he either overdosed or became so dependent that he'd lose custody. He just underestimated how much you gave him that final night." Laurel's breathing became rapid and shallow. "You're lying." "Am I? How else would I know about the benzodiazepines? About the way you crushed them into his beer? He didn't drink beer." The words exploded out of her before she could stop them, and Cass saw the exact moment she realized what she'd revealed. No, he said softly. He didn't drink beer. But you made him that night, didn't you? Told him it would help him sleep, help him deal with the stress of the divorce proceedings. Tears started streaming down Laurel's face. But they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of a cornered animal. You don't understand, she said. He was going to destroy everything. He was going to take Hollis and leave me with nothing. So you decided to take him instead. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. The confession poured out of her like poison. Bren was going to ruin everything. He couldn't handle the truth, and I just let him drown. So you gave him more pills. He was so angry, so out of control. I just wanted him to stop shouting. But then he got dizzy and fell, and the water. She covered her face with her hands. I tried to help him, but he was so heavy, and he wasn't breathing right. You watched him drown. I tried to save him. But even as she said it, Cass could see the lie in her eyes. I called for help. You called 911 20 minutes after he died. 20 minutes to make sure he was gone and clean up the evidence. Laurel looked up at him with hatred burning in her eyes. You can't prove any of this. I don't have to, Cass said, standing. You just did it for me. That's when she noticed the small device clipped to his jacket collar, and her face went completely white. You bastard, she whispered. No, Cass said, his voice cold as winter. This is what you built. Now live in it. Detective Walsh emerged from behind a nearby tree, her badge visible and her hand resting on her service weapon. But instead of arresting Laurel, she simply nodded to Cass. We got all, Walsh said. Every word. 3 days after the recorded confession, Naira delivered everything to the district attorney's office. Medical reports documenting Hollis's abuse and neglect. The forged relinquishment form with its fraudulent signature. Toxicology reanalysis showing lethal levels of benzodiazepines in Brennan's system. The recovered text messages between Laurel and Kirk, including the damning exchange where Laurel had written, Brennan's death gives us both freedom. We just need to get that kid out of the picture. Most devastating of all was the recording of Laurel's confession. Her own voice admitting she had watched Brennan drown. Hediye Santos reviewed the evidence with the thoroughness of a prosecutor who knew she had an airtight case. This is more than enough for an indictment, she told Naira and Cass during their meeting. We'll be filing charges for second-degree murder, child abandonment, forgery, reckless endangerment of a minor, and obstruction of justice. When will you make the arrest? Cass asked. Soon. We want to coordinate with state police in case Kirk tries to run when he hears about the charges. The arrest came on a Saturday afternoon during Laurel's baby shower. She'd rented the community center and invited half the town, playing the role of grieving widow bravely rebuilding her life. Pink and blue decorations hung from the ceiling, and tables groaned under the weight of gifts for the child she claimed was Brennan's. Detective Walsh arrived with 2 uniformed officers, their presence causing a ripple of confusion through the crowd of guests. Laurel was opening presents at the head table, her face glowing with what looked like happiness, but was actually the satisfaction of a woman who thought she'd gotten away with murder. Laurel Mercer, Walsh said, approaching the table with her badge visible, you're under arrest for the murder of Brennan Mercer. The room fell silent. Someone dropped a plate, the crash echoing through the sudden stillness. Laurel's face went white, then red, then white again. This is ridiculous, she said, her voice shaking. I'm pregnant. You can't arrest a pregnant woman at her baby's shower. Ma'am, please stand up and place your hands behind your back. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Walsh placed the handcuffs on Laurel's wrists. Several guests began filming with their phones, documenting the moment when Asheville's most notorious crime finally reached its conclusion. Charges included child abandonment, forgery, reckless endangerment of a minor, obstruction of justice, and second-degree murder for the death of her husband. Kirk had fled the state once he was subpoenaed, but state police were already tracking him down. Laurel's composure finally shattered completely. She screamed threats and denials as the officers led her away, her voice echoing across the parking lot where wedding guests stood in shocked clusters. You'll never prove anything, she shrieked at the crowd. Brennan was sick. He killed himself, but nobody was listening anymore. The evidence spoke louder than her protests, and justice had finally caught up with her lies. Cass attended the hearing with Naira, leaving Hollis with a babysitter he'd hired, a kind woman named Beth who worked at the daycare and had experience with children who'd been through trauma. The courtroom was packed with reporters and curious onlookers. The Brennan Mercer case had become front-page news in Asheville, a small town where murder was rare and family betrayal even rarer. Laurel's new attorney, a high-priced criminal defense lawyer named Davidson who'd driven down from Portland, argued eloquently for reasonable bail. His client was pregnant, he said, with no prior criminal record and strong ties to the community. The prosecutor, ADA Rebecca Santos, countered with Laurel's recorded confession and the evidence of her systematic deception. Your Honor, the defendant has shown a willingness to harm those closest to her when they threaten her interests. She poses a clear danger to the community and a significant flight risk. Judge Reeves, the same judge who'd awarded Cass custody of Hollis, studied the case file with the careful attention she brought to all proceedings. Mrs. Mercer, she said finally, the evidence against you is substantial and includes your own recorded confession to causing your husband's death. The court also notes your abandonment of a 4-year-old child and subsequent attempts to manipulate the legal system. Bail is denied. Laurel's composure finally cracked completely. She collapsed in sobs at the defense table while Davidson tried to comfort her. But Cass could see the calculation even in her tears, the way she angled her body toward the reporters in the gallery to maximize the sympathy of her image. As they left the courthouse, Naira turned to Cass. That's probably the last time we'll see her until trial. Are you ready for what comes next? What comes next? Depositions, pretrial motions, media attention, and eventually, a trial where you'll have to testify about everything you've discovered. Cass thought about Hollis, about the little girl who'd finally started sleeping through the night without nightmares. Will Hollis have to testify? Not if I can help it. But the defense might try to paint Brennan in a negative light, suggest that Laurel was acting in self-defense or under duress. You need to be prepared for them to attack his character. Let them try, Cass said. I knew my brother better than anyone. Whatever they think they can dig up, it won't change what Laurel did. But that night, alone in his workshop while Hollis slept upstairs, Cass found himself going through Brennan's personal effects one more time. Tools, books, letters, photos, the accumulated debris of a life cut short. In the bottom of a box he'd searched a dozen times before, his fingers found something new, a small notebook wedged behind a false bottom he'd never noticed. The pages were filled with Brennan's handwriting, dates and times and observations that painted a picture of a man growing increasingly paranoid and afraid. March 15th. L. Acting strange again. Asked why I was checking my drinks. Played it off as a joke, but she didn't laugh. March 22nd. Found pills hidden in kitchen cabinet. L. Said they were for headaches, but the bottle was from Kirk's prescription. Why does she have his medication? April 3rd. Woke up groggy again. Don't remember drinking anything strong enough to cause that. L. Said I've been working too hard. Need to relax more. April 10th. Hired Rex. Can't trust my own perceptions anymore. Either I'm losing my mind or someone is gaslighting me. The entries continued right up until the week before Brennan's death, each one documenting his growing awareness that his wife was systematically poisoning him. The final entry was dated 3 days before he died. April 28th. Rex confirmed everything. L. has been seeing Kirk for months. Found evidence she's been drugging me to cover her tracks. Meeting with lawyer tomorrow to file for divorce and full custody. If something happens to me, I want everyone to know it wasn't suicide. I would never leave Hollis alone with that woman. Cass closed the notebook and sat back in his chair. Brennan had known. In his final days, his brother had figured out exactly what was happening to him. The knowledge should have been comforting proof that Brennan hadn't given up, that he'd fought until the end. Instead, it filled Cass with a rage so pure and cold that his hand shook. Laurel hadn't just killed his brother, she tortured him first, made him doubt his own sanity, isolated him from everyone who might have helped. And somewhere out there, Kirk Blaine was still free. The trial of Laurel Mercer began on a gray February morning, 4 months after her arrest. Snow dusted the courthouse steps, and a crowd of reporters huddled against the cold, their breath visible in the frigid air. Cass arrived early with Hollis, who would spend the day at school while the proceedings unfolded. The little girl had grown in the months since coming to live with him. She was taller, healthier, and the constant fear had faded from her eyes. But she still asked questions about her mother, questions that grew harder to answer as the trial date approached. "Dad," she said as he walked her to her classroom, "are you going to the place where they talk about Mommy today?" "Yes, sweetheart." "Is Mommy in trouble?" Cass knelt down to her level, choosing his words carefully. "Your mommy made some very bad choices. The people at the courthouse are trying to decide what should happen because of those choices. Will she come home?" The question cut deep because Hollis asked it without hope or expectation, just the detached curiosity of a child who'd learned not to depend on adults to keep their promises. "No," Cass said. "She won't be coming home." Hollis nodded solemnly and hugged him tight before running into her classroom. Watching her go, Cass marveled at her resilience, at the way children could adapt to even the most devastating circumstances when they finally felt safe. The courtroom was packed when proceedings began. ADA Santos had built her case methodically, presenting evidence that painted a clear picture of premeditation and calculated cruelty. The recorded confession would be the centerpiece, but she'd surrounded it with financial records, witness testimony, and forensic evidence that left little room for doubt. Laurel's defense attorney, Davidson, had crafted a strategy around battered woman syndrome and postpartum depression. His opening statement portrayed Laurel as a victim herself trapped in an abusive marriage, suffering from hormonal imbalances that clouded her judgment, acting out of desperation rather than malice. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Davidson said, his voice rich with sympathy, "Laurel Mercer is not a monster. She's a woman who found herself in an impossible situation, failed by a system that should have protected her, driven to desperate measures by circumstances beyond her control." Cass sat in the gallery with Naira, watching Laurel's performance at the defense table. She'd lost weight during her time in jail, and her pregnancy was now visible beneath the conservative dress Davidson had chosen for her. Every gesture was calculated to evoke sympathy, the way she touched her stomach protectively, the tears that appeared at precisely the right moments, the bewildered expression she wore whenever particularly damaging evidence was presented. The prosecution's case unfolded over 3 days. Tully Raines testified about Brennan's concerns in the weeks before his death, about the bitter-tasting drinks and the growing paranoia. Rex Winters presented the surveillance evidence of Laurel's affair and the financial irregularities in her bank accounts to Dr. Rivera, the physician who'd examined Hollis, testified about the signs of long-term neglect and abuse. Her testimony was clinical but devastating, each medical finding another nail in Laurel's coffin. "In my professional opinion," Dr. Rivera said, "this child had been systematically malnourished and physically abused over a period of months. The pattern of injuries suggests regular physical violence, not occasional accidents." The recorded confession was played on the 4th day. The courtroom fell silent as Laurel's voice filled the space, her words clear and incriminating. Even Davidson looked shaken as his client's confession echoed from the speakers. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that. I just wanted him to be calm, to be reasonable. But he figured out what I was doing. He said he was going to have me arrested, that he'd make sure I never saw Hollis again." When the recording ended, several jurors were staring at Laurel with undisguised horror. Her carefully crafted image of victimhood had evaporated in the face of her own words. Davidson's defense began with expert testimony about domestic abuse and the psychological effects of prolonged victimization. But without any evidence that Brennan had ever harmed Laurel, the arguments fell flat. When Laurel took the stand in her own defense, Cass leaned forward in his seat. This was the moment he'd been waiting for, the chance to see if she could maintain her facade under direct examination. Davidson led her through a carefully rehearsed narrative of fear and desperation. According to Laurel's testimony, Brennan had been increasingly violent and controlling, threatening to take Hollis away if she ever tried to leave him. The affair with Kirk had been her only escape from an intolerable situation. "I never meant for anyone to get hurt," Laurel said, tears streaming down her face. "I just wanted Brennan to get help, to see that our marriage could be saved if he'd just stop drinking and address his anger issues." It was a masterful performance, and Cass could see some of the jurors beginning to soften toward her. Then ADA Santos rose for cross-examination, and the real Laurel began to emerge. "Mrs. Mercer," Santos said, "you testified that your husband was violent toward you. Do you have any medical records documenting these alleged injuries?" I never went to the doctor. I was too scared." "Did you ever call the police?" "No." "Did you ever tell anyone about this alleged abuse?" "Friends, family members, co-workers." "I was ashamed." Santos pulled out a stack of photos. "I'm showing you exhibits 47 through 52, which are photos from your social media accounts during the year before your husband's death. Can you explain why someone who was being systematically abused would post happy family photos and romantic messages about her husband?" Laurel's composure began to crack. "We had good times too. The abuse wasn't constant." "Mrs. Mercer, these photos show no signs of physical injury. Your captions describe your husband as the love of my life and the best father any child could ask for. Were you lying to your social media followers, or are you lying to this jury?" "I don't. It's complicated," Santos pressed harder. "Let's talk about the night your husband died. You testified that you gave him medication to calm him down. How many pills did you give him?" "I don't remember exactly. Was it more than the recommended dosage?" "I may be." "Mrs. Mercer, your husband weighed 180 pounds. The coroner found enough benzodiazepines in his system to sedate a 300-pound man. That's not a mistake, that's attempted murder. I wasn't trying to kill him, but you knew the dosage was dangerous." Laurel's face went pale. "I just wanted him to stop yelling. So you gave him enough medication to render him unconscious, then left him alone in a bathtub full of water." "I didn't leave him alone. I tried to help when he started having trouble." "Help how?" "By calling 911 immediately. I panicked." Santos pulled out the phone records. "Mrs. Mercer, your husband stopped breathing at approximately 9:15 p.m., according to the coroner's timeline. Your call to 911 wasn't made until 9:37 p.m. What are you doing for 22 minutes while your husband was dying?" The courtroom was completely silent. Laurel opened and closed her mouth several times, but no words came out. "Mrs. Mercer," Santos continued, "weren't you actually making sure he was dead before you called for help?" "No." The word exploded out of her. "That's not what happened." "Then explain the 22-minute delay." "I was trying to save him. I was doing CPR without calling for professional help, without seeking assistance from neighbors or emergency services. I wasn't thinking clearly." Santos moved closer to the witness stand. "Mrs. Mercer, 3 days after your husband's death, you moved Kirk Blaine into your marital home. Does that sound like the behavior of a grieving widow?" "I needed support. I was pregnant and alone." "You were pregnant with Mr. Blaine's child while still married to your husband, correct?" The question hung in the air like a sword. Laurel's face went white, and for a moment, Cass thought she might faint. That's not." "Mrs. Mercer, I'll ask again. Were you pregnant with Kirk Blaine's child at the time of your husband's death?" Davidson objected, but Judge Harrison overruled him. The jury needed to understand the full scope of Laurel's deception. "Yes," Laurel whispered. "So your husband wasn't just discovering your affair, he was discovering that you'd been carrying another man's child while living in his home." "It wasn't like that." "How was it, Mrs. Mercer? Explain to the jury how a woman tells her husband she's pregnant with her lover's baby." Laurel broke down completely then, sobbing uncontrollably on the witness stand. But there was no sympathy in the courtroom, only disgust and revulsion at the depths of her betrayal. When the defense rested, Cass was called as a rebuttal witness. He took the stand wearing his dress uniform, the same one he'd worn to Brennan's funeral. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone in the courtroom. Santos walked him through his investigation, the evidence he'd uncovered, the systematic way Laurel had destroyed his brother's life. When she asked him to describe Brennan as a father, Cass's voice was steady but filled with emotion. "My brother lived for his daughter," he said, looking directly at the jury. "She was the center of his world. He worked double shifts to save for her college fund, read to her every night, taught her to ride a bike in our grandmother's driveway. The idea that he would abandon her by taking his own life is not just wrong, it's impossible." "Mr. Mercer," Santos said, "in your opinion, did your brother kill himself?" No, Cass said firmly. My brother was murdered by the woman he trusted most. And then she tried to destroy the child he died, trying to protect. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned, their faces were grim, their verdict unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Laurel's scream of anguish echoed through the courtroom as the guilty verdict was read. She collapsed at the defense table, her carefully maintained composure finally shattered completely. Cass felt no satisfaction, no sense of victory. All he felt was a bone-deep exhaustion and the knowledge that justice, while necessary, could never bring his brother back. As the courtroom emptied, Naira placed a hand on his shoulder. It's over, she said. You did it. We did it, Cass corrected. But it's not over yet. There's still sentencing, and Kirk is still out there somewhere. The police will find him, and when they do, he'll face charges as an accessory. That evening, Cass picked up Hollis from daycare and took her for ice cream, their weekly tradition that had started after the custody hearing. She was chattering about her day, about the art project she'd made, and the story her teacher had read. Dad, she said, looking up from her strawberry cone, did the people at the courthouse decide about Mommy today? Yes, sweetheart. They decided that she did some very bad things, and she's going to have to stay in jail for a long time. Hollis nodded solemnly. Good. She was mean to Daddy, and she was mean to me. The simple acceptance in her voice broke Cass's heart. No 4-year-old should have to understand concepts like murder and betrayal, but Hollis had been forced to grow up faster than any child should. Hollis, he said, do you know that none of what happened was your fault? I know. You tell me that lots. And do you know that I'm never going to let anyone hurt you again? She smiled, the first completely carefree smile he'd seen from her in months. I know that too. You're the best dad ever. The words hit him like a physical blow, filling him with a love so fierce it was almost painful. This little girl had saved him as much as he'd saved her, giving him a purpose beyond grief and rage. I love you, sweetheart, he said. I love you too, Dad. Spring came early to Asheville that year, and with it came a sense of renewal that Cass hadn't felt since before Brennan's death. He'd spent the winter months settling into a routine with Hollis, establishing the kind of stable, predictable life she'd never had with Laurel. They moved back into Brennan's house in March, after Cass had spent weeks renovating and redecorating to remove any trace of Laurel's presence. Hollis had chosen new paint for her room, a soft lavender that she said reminded her of the flowers in their grandmother's garden and helped him arrange her books and toys on the shelves Brennan had built years earlier. This was Daddy's workshop, Hollis said one afternoon, standing in the doorway of the converted garage where Brennan had kept his woodworking tools. Can we make it yours too? Cass looked around the space that still smelled like sawdust and would stain. Brennan's projects sat half-finished on the workbench, a dollhouse he'd been building for Hollis's 5th birthday, a jewelry box intended as a Christmas gift. Would you like that? Cass asked. Yes. Then when I get bigger, you can teach me to make things like Daddy did. The simple request filled Cass with a warmth that had nothing to do with the spring sunshine streaming through the windows. He'd been struggling with how to honor Brennan's memory while building a new life for himself and Hollis. This felt like the answer. That weekend, they cleaned out the workshop together. Hollis helped sort through Brennan's tools while Cass explained what each one was used for. They found photo albums filled with pictures of projects Brennan had completed over the years: custom furniture, children's toys, decorative pieces that showed real artistic skill. Daddy was really good at making things, Hollis said, studying a photo of an intricate rocking horse. He was. And you know what? I think you might be good at making things too. They spent the afternoon finishing the dollhouse Brennan had started. Cass guided Hollis's small hands as she helped sand the tiny pieces and apply the final coat of paint. When they were done, the dollhouse was beautiful, a perfect Victorian mansion, complete with detailed trim and working shutters. Can we put this in my room? Hollis asked. Of course. It's yours. Daddy made it for you. That night, as Cass tucked Hollis into bed, she looked up at him with those serious green eyes that reminded him so much of Brennan. Dad, she said, I'm glad Mommy can't come back. Is that okay? The question caught him off guard. Why do you ask, sweetheart? Because teacher says we should love our mommies even when they make mistakes. But I don't love Mommy anymore. She hurt Daddy, and she hurt me. Cass sat on the edge of her bed, choosing his words carefully. Hollis, it's okay not to love someone who hurt you. Love has to be earned, and your mother didn't earn yours. But what if that makes me a bad person? It makes you smart. Good people don't hurt the people they're supposed to protect. Your mother made choices that hurt you and your daddy, and you don't have to forgive her for that. Will you forgive her? No, Cass said without hesitation. I won't. Hollis smiled and snuggled deeper into her blankets. Good. I don't want to forgive her either. The conversation stayed with Cass as he sat in the workshop later that evening, planning his next project. He decided to start a small business making custom furniture, partly to honor Brennan's memory and partly to give himself a way to support Hollis without depending on his military disability payments. But more than that, he wanted to create something positive from the darkness of the past year. Every piece he made would be a rejection of the destruction Laurel had caused, a statement that building was stronger than breaking. His phone rang as he was sketching plans for a child's desk. The caller ID showed Rex Winter's name. Cass, the private investigator said when he answered, I've got news about Kirk Blaine. Good news or bad news? Depends on your perspective. Police picked him up in Nevada 3 days ago. He's been running a real estate scam in Las Vegas, bilking retirees out of their savings with fake property investments. Is he fighting extradition? Nope. Came quietly when they mentioned the murder charges in Oregon. Apparently, he's more afraid of his Las Vegas victims than he is of our legal system. Cass felt a cold satisfaction settle in his chest. When does he get back here? Tomorrow. His arraignment is set for Friday. What are the chances he'll flip on Laurel? High. Kirk's looking at federal fraud charges plus accessory to murder. He'll say whatever he thinks will reduce his sentence. Will it matter for Laurel's appeal? Not likely. Her conviction was solid even without Kirk's testimony, but it might help fill in some of the blanks about their planning. After hanging up, Cass sat in the quiet workshop and tried to process the news. Part of him wanted to attend Kirk's arraignment, to see the man who'd helped destroy his brother face the consequences of his actions. But another part of him, the part that was focused on building a future rather than dwelling in the past, thought it might be better to let the legal system handle Kirk while he concentrated on more important things, like the little girl sleeping upstairs who'd started calling him Dad and meant it, like the business he was building in his brother's memory, like the life he was creating from the ashes of the worst year he'd ever lived through. The decision was easier than he'd expected. Kirk Blaine could rot in prison for all Cass cared, but he wasn't going to waste any more time thinking about him. He had better things to do with his life. Laurel's sentencing hearing took place on a humid day in June, 6 months after her conviction. The courtroom was less crowded than during the trial. Most of the media attention had moved on to other stories, and the curious onlookers had found new sources of entertainment. But Cass was there, sitting in the front row with Naira. He'd left Hollis with Beth, the babysitter who'd become almost like family over the past months. His niece, his daughter, was thriving in ways that still amazed him. She'd started kindergarten in the fall and was already reading above grade level. Her nightmares had stopped, and she'd gained 15 pounds of healthy weight. Most importantly, she'd stopped flinching when adults raised their voices or moved too quickly. The constant fear that had shadowed her during her time with Laurel was gone, replaced by the confidence that came from knowing she was truly safe. Laurel entered the courtroom in shackles, her orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the designer clothes she'd worn during the trial. Prison had aged her. Her hair was stringy and gray at the roots, her face pale and drawn. The pregnancy she'd tried to use for sympathy had ended in a miscarriage during her 3rd month in jail, removing even that source of manipulation. Judge Harrison called the court to order and asked if Laurel had anything to say before sentencing. She stood slowly, her lawyer's hand on her arm for support. Your Honor, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, I know I made terrible mistakes, but I never meant for anyone to die. I love my husband, despite our problems, and I love my daughter more than my own life. It was a pathetic performance, lacking the conviction of her earlier lies. Even Laurel seemed to know it was too late for manipulation, that whatever sympathy she might have once commanded had been exhausted by the evidence of her cruelty. I accept responsibility for my actions, she continued, though her tone suggested she was simply reciting words her lawyer had prepared. "And I pray that someday my daughter will understand that everything I did was because I was scared and alone and didn't know how to ask for help." Judge Harrison listened without expression, then consulted the sentencing guidelines. "Mrs. Mercer, this court has rarely seen such a calculated and callous disregard for human life. You systematically poisoned your husband over a period of weeks, then left him to die when your plan went too far. You abandoned your 4-year-old daughter on a country road in the middle of the night, then filed false police reports to avoid responsibility for your crimes." The judge's voice grew harder as she continued. "You showed no remorse during your trial, attempting to blame the victim and manipulate this court with false claims of abuse. Even now, your statement rings hollow, focusing more on your own suffering than on the lives you destroyed." She paused, looking directly at Laurel. "The prosecution has requested the maximum sentence under the guidelines, and this court sees no reason to show mercy to someone who showed none to others." Judge Harrison opened the sentencing document. "On the charge of murder in the second degree, this court sentences you to 6 years in prison. On the charge of child endangerment, 1 year. On the charge of child abandonment, 6 months. On the charges of filing false reports and obstruction of justice, 6 months each." She set down the papers. "These sentences will run consecutively, not concurrently. You will serve a total of 8 years in the Oregon State Penitentiary, with permanent loss of parental custody and court-ordered psychiatric evaluation." Laurel collapsed as the sentence was read, her sobs echoing through the courtroom. But there was no sympathy in the gallery, only the satisfaction that came from seeing justice finally served. As the bailiffs led Laurel away, she turned back toward the gallery one last time. Her eyes found Cass, and for a moment, her mask slipped completely. The hatred in her expression was so pure, so venomous, that several people in the courtroom gasped audibly. "This isn't over," she mouthed silently. Cass met her gaze without flinching, his expression as cold and implacable as winter. "Yes," he said quietly, "it is." Outside the courthouse, reporters tried to get statements from Cass and Naira, but they declined to comment. The legal battle was over, but the real victory wasn't the sentence Laurel had received, it was the life Cass was building with Hollis, the future they were creating together. That evening, Cass told Hollis about the sentencing while they worked in the garden behind Brennan's house. She listened solemnly as he explained that her mother would be in prison for a very long time, that she would never be able to hurt anyone again. "Good," Hollis said simply, then went back to planting the tomato seedlings they'd started from seeds. "Dad, can we make a scarecrow for the garden? I saw one in a book at school." The easy transition from discussing her mother's prison sentence to planning garden projects still amazed Cass. Children's resilience was remarkable, but so was their ability to recognize when a threat had been neutralized and move on to more important concerns. "We can make whatever you want," he said. "This is our garden now. Our garden, our house, our workshop," Hollis said, counting on her fingers. "What else is ours?" "Everything," Cass said, pulling her into a hug that smelled like dirt and sunshine and hope. "Everything good that we can build together." A year later, Cass stood in the workshop where he'd once confronted the evidence of his brother's murder. The space had been transformed into something bright and purposeful, half woodworking shop, half classroom. For the weekend program, he'd started teaching metalworking and basic construction skills to at-risk teenagers.